Hello everyone, I'm Sami Atabani and I am hosting this panel today with the rest of the team. What I will do is I'll introduce myself briefly and then I will pass on to each of the panelists to introduce themselves. I was at Arm Limited for the best part of 27 years and in the IP licensing team, involved in commercial licensing, open source licensing, as well as the M&A team whenever there was an acquisition or divestiture of the certain functions within the company. And I think we will start with you, Matt, again.
Hi everybody, I think a number of you have been in the sessions over the past day or two. My name's Matt Barker. I have a long history in open source software companies, very early employee of Canonical, the people behind Ubuntu, where I was trying to work out how to sell services around that. I was there for 5 or 6 years. I worked very closely with Amanda, which is how we know each other. She was the legal counsel, and I was always pestering her for updates to contracts to try and get my sales number done. I then became an early employee at MongoDB, which is obviously a very successful NoSQL open source database company. Well, it was open source. I think people have told me it's now proprietary. And then I set up a company in 2015 off the back of the open sourcing of Kubernetes, which was open sourced by Google. Started with services, was bootstrapped, created an open source project, which became a core part of the Kubernetes ecosystem, and then were acquired a few years ago. So I've experienced all of the topics that we're discussing as part of this session. I've struggled with them all, so hopefully we'll talk about those challenges so you don't have to go through the pain of experiencing them yourselves. And I took on a role as entrepreneur in residence at Open UK to try and help foster, encourage, mentor, and educate around starting an open source business.
Hi everyone, my name is Amandine Lepape. I'm the co-founder and guardian of Matrix, which is an open standard for decentralized and secure communication. I'm also COO and co-founder of Element, which is a commercial company building on top of Matrix. And this Element actually has been backed by VCs, which is why this conversation is relevant to me.
And hi everyone, my name is Heikki Nousiainen. I'm a field CTO and co-founder at Aiven. And Aiven is a software as a service or managed service provider for open source data technologies. So we want to make it easy for development teams to consume and build on top of the open source technologies that we love and we think that are the best on the market. So my background, I come from a software development background, and just before starting Aiven, I was working at a Finnish software company and on kind of looking ways how to utilize cloud, how to make the teams more productive, how to deploy DevOps in a meaningful way, and kind of open source was cloud. We could get all the computing resources, but then we still had to push through our operations unit to be able to use the open source solutions that we wanted. So that's a kind of Aiven is perhaps a product or service that we would have loved to exist at the time when we were working in the previous companies.
Okay, so this is the last panel for the day, and I think we've had several sessions understanding what you need to think about as a founder. And the last component is the funding models and how to scale up. So I'm going to sort of really get the team to talk about their experiences and some of the challenges that they have faced, and then open the floor for discussions. Then hopefully that will give you a little bit more perspective. So sort of without preference, so let's start with you, Matt.
Well, I guess I feel like I'm probably someone who knows very little about taking funding, actually, because I never did it. And it was a conscious decision because I did have friends who had been burnt, honestly, by investors. And I was very nervous about the fact that I wanted to reduce as much risk as I could in starting my first business because I wanted it to be a success. So I took the decision to bootstrap. So I'd spent a long time saving money and getting myself into a position where I had enough money to be able to pay to live, like feed, clothe, and pay my mortgage. And I didn't have any money to put into the company. So I had to find money from somewhere quickly, and I felt the best way of doing that would be by selling services. And so Kubernetes being quite a complex piece of technology, I thought would be a good place to start selling services with. So that's where I started. I thought maybe in the future I might consider taking funding. It got to a point in about 2019 where I'd built enough of the service revenue, and we were successful enough to be able to consider getting funding for the services business that we built. But we also had a relatively successful, a successful open source project. And obviously there were a lot of people saying you should take funding to go down the product route. So for me, a large part of the difficulty in thinking about taking funding was whether I should try and take the company down a service route and go on a buy and build strategy, which I'd seen success with from companies from the first generation of moving to public cloud, with companies like CloudReach and Cloud Sherpas, where they effectively got a lot of money. They use that money to go and invest or buy sort of small boutique cloud migration companies, and then they kind of grew that way, or whether I took what I considered to be a much bigger risk of taking VC and then trying to build a product company and do that. Ultimately, I decided that neither were for me, and actually we ended up being acquired. So I didn't actually go through the process of taking investment. So I know you started with me, but I'm actually probably more interested in finding out about why and how my co-panelists actually decided to take funding.
We can draw on your experiences, but let everybody have their opportunity, and then we can go back to you, because I think it is a business model that you have created. It's just a different approach that you have chosen. So Amandine, let's go with you next.
So on our side, basically we never really wanted to take funding. Like, our idea was like, well, we're going to need some money, and I'll explain why shortly. But we really didn't want to become a kind of Silicon Valley startup, like super fueled with lots of money you don't know what to do with, and it's dangerous, and then just being, we always wanted to try to be profitable at some point to get there. The thing is, what happened is that we got incubated during 3 years in a company to actually seed the open source projects. So during 3 years, we were funded. We were a team of like 15, 16 people. So it's like 5, 6, 7 million that they actually put to just write the basis of the open source software. And once you have this amount of people to actually feed, etc., when we wanted to start monetizing, we spun out to set up Element as the commercial company. We didn't have a customer yet, so we actually had no choice but try to find external money to make sure that we could actually pay for the team. So that's why we ended up going this route. And we did our seed and say, okay, let's, the idea is to not raise more after, and then we did our Series A, and like, oh, let's see, not sure we'll do our Series B, and then we did a Series B, and then a B1, and et cetera. So the thing is that the shape of Element today, it's basically cut in three. We're about 160 people. 50 people are across BizOps, commercial, marketing, etc. And then 100 people of engineering and product. Half of them are pure contribution to the Matrix protocol, so everything is donated to the foundation, literally the copyright we are handing over. And half of them are actually working on the Element products. Some of them are open source, and some of them are closed source. So when we try to raise funding, it's quite tough, because VCs look at just the numbers and like, but why are your costs like double where they should be? Well, we're putting most of them into the foundation. So I don't think that all open source projects do that. Let's see, even those who have a kind of product model as opposed to services. But it's, yeah, that's where we are at.
All right. Our story started with we were four founders, and we really set out to build the product and a service. We had it ready and launched it, and kind of we funded the initial development through our savings, and then doing some consultancy on the side, and then using that money to build the company. And I think we just about reached the level in recurring revenue that we could pay our own wages, and then we were kind of. Now we are at this in full time, And then the next steps is that what do we do next? And that was the calculation. And we kind of considered that whether we want to go through the bootstrap route or we want to get external funding. And our perhaps the decision making or how do we think about it was that we had a product out and we had some customers. Our first paying customer came out of Mexico, where we didn't exactly have any marketing presence, but that was a kind of additional validation to that the service that we had could help developers and could help developers globally. And now we started thinking that we are Finnish, or from Finland, fairly small market. The first hires, we started to think that we need some marketing. How do we reach the additional markets? And that was the kind of point that if we go that by revenue only, it's a little bit slow. If we go for external funding, then we can do those hires a little bit upfront and a little bit aggressive and kind of try to get the word out of our service.
So I think I want to lead this conversation towards, so did each of you have a business plan, or did it evolve as you were going? Because I think it's quite clear that all of you had sort of some initial funding either through savings or through providing services to build up, or in your case is an incubation. So I'm just curious, at what point did you start to think sort of formally build a business model and a business case to help you with scaling up? So again, I think I'll start with you, given that you had the easier start with the incubation.
Yeah, basically, so 3 years we were not worrying too much. It was more like, will this work? Because it's a bit of a moonshot saying that you're going to replace email and the phone network. So let's say, okay, let's build it, see if it works. And then at some point we had competitors of Amdocs, the company who incubated us, were actually starting to build services on top of products and services on top of Matrix and monetize it. So that's when we thought about, well, maybe we need to set up an independent company. It will be easier. And we went through a big brainstorming session. What kind of business model can we use? What are the options there? We came up with 72 business models. It was a very long list. So one of them were, surely this could be useful for governments, but oh my God, no way we're getting entangled with governments. Tenders, a long sales cycle, no way. We'll just go for easy enterprise collaboration on a SaaS platform, and then we can evolve and we can provide an app store later on top of Matrix, and we can provide, if people want to deploy on-premise, we may be able to provide proprietary products. Let's see. So we started like this, but turns out that the first customers knocking at the door were governments, because it was such a good product market fit where every ministry deployed their communication system. They have control. There is no, shall we use your system or my system? They control it and they both own the communication. So we had to do with it, and they wanted on-premise, well, at least self-hosted, of course. So that's where we had to review a bit. We still had the SaaS platform, but we knew that in that case, then having value-add proprietary products like gateways, which allows you to connect between the secure network and the public network, or antivirus, or audit bot for compliance. These sort of things would be very valuable for enterprises and government. So that's where we started looking at proprietary product. But it's meanwhile, when you're just starting and the French government knocks at your door and want something a bit more specific, then we had to go the route of service and actually provide some specific developments, help them run the platform, help them customize the app. So we started with this, and more customers came asking for these. And so we started by being very services heavy, and it's just now, so like almost 6 years in, that we're starting to push the licensing model a bit more, because we're trying to build something scalable, basically. And I'm always amazed listening to companies like, oh, we just do services, but how do you do it? It's not very scalable. And I think quite often people who are VC-backed are usually have a product model, because when we go to VCs, say, and tell them, oh, our main customers are government and we're selling services, they're like, what? No way. Yeah.
So just out of curiosity, did you spin off first, and was there some funding given by the parent company, or did you wait until you sort of won your first major, the French government sort of contract? I'm just trying to gauge how is this funding secured?
Yeah, basically we worked off the company, so we jumped with 12 people, 0 money, like just a kind of 3-month package or something. And so we gave the parent company some shares into the new company because they still had put like 7 million in or something. But yeah, we started 3 months and we had 3 months to raise money. So it was like the team trusted us.
Good. How about you? So at what point?
Yes. Hold on. I lost the plot. Can you?
So at what point did you, I mean, you obviously, the model that you have chosen is that you had to have established some funding. I appreciate in your case and your co-founders, it was savings, the individual money that you've decided to put in. But I'm curious, at what point did you scale up and did you receive funding from outside, if you did, or did you go it all the way, all alone with those initial savings?
Yeah, so we did go with those initial savings, and really the time for us to go for trying to raise money was when we were kind of starting to hire additional people. But maybe back to, you asked about the business model. So we just looked at some old slides and our proposals, and we are quite close to the model. So we wanted to build a service that us as a developers would have wanted. It was very specific to Postgres. Postgres has a service because we use that as a component. Perhaps and kind of hourly billing, easy to consume, no upfront commitments, make it really as easy as possible for developers to adopt the open source database technologies. But perhaps the biggest realization to us came that when we used a lot of other open source components in the background to be able to realize our service and spend a lot of time in making sure that we could run those reliably in cloud, we realized that these other technologies are actually equally as powerful than what we loved. So we expanded from that one single service to first to Apache, Kafka, then OpenSearch, the time series databases, M3, things that we are using ourselves in the stack, but hope that other developers can benefit from.
You, Matt?
Yes, I did have a business plan that was very, very simple. It was make money via services around Kubernetes, explore Kubernetes, look at where the gaps are, create an open source project, and then try to build a product strategy around that and sell ongoing subscription services or proprietary features. So that was my very broad plan. But when I think back to the business plan that I actually wrote, it was actually around database as a service, because I'd heard that Google were using the predecessor of Kubernetes Borg inside the company to run stateful services. And I'd been coming from MongoDB, where I knew that there was a huge demand for database as a service. So I was thinking, could you actually build what in Kubernetes is called an operator model around Kubernetes, put something like MongoDB into a container, and then automate that and create a database as a service? So my first year was actually exploring that, and very rapidly realized that no one was using Kubernetes at all, and actually what they were first going to use was going to be stateless services. But we did actually manage to win a contract. I'm sure they don't mind me telling you this, with CouchDB, where we actually did create an operator. So we did start to sort of develop that idea. And who knows, if I continued down that path, I may have been competing with you, Heikki, but it didn't quite work out. So I actually had to rip up that business plan quite early and realize that we had to go down the stateless route. And at that point, then we started looking at Kubernetes provisioning, because actually setting up Kubernetes was just so difficult that the open source projects that we started creating was actually around how you would actually deploy Kubernetes. And a lot of the conversation at the time was Kubernetes was so difficult to set up. I mean, there was even sort of instructions on GitHub that was called Kubernetes the hard way. This is how you have to set it all up. And then, so that's kind of where we focused. And then it was more by chance and accident that we ended up creating the open source project that ended up becoming the successful one. But yeah, I had a business plan, but basically ripped it up within a year.
Okay. Why don't we mix it and have some, open the floor for some questions, and then we can come back for further discussion. So,
Hi, I'm Matt, future founder, maybe, hopefully. Question for Amandine. The services that you made for the French government and others that you were kind of forced a little bit to consider and build, did they become baked into the core product, or were they kept as a kind of a tick box optional extra, or how did kind of the forced change from your initial plan, kind of how did that get incorporated and merged together as things went on?
So some of them were customized the app we had. So basically they were taking Element as an open source application, fork it and customize it. So it was like pure dev to customize their version, like make it blue, white and red because it's France, etc. Some of it was like run the platform, and this is where basically we got to the point where we took the tools we use on our SaaS platform and packaged them so that we can use them when running our customers' platform on premise or their clouds. And support is not much to do there. So there also sometimes they wanted a specific product that we didn't have, and we would develop and then sell them, or they would sponsor the development and then you reduce the license, or this sort of things. So it's a bit of everything. But some of it has been funded by customers and then baked into the product after.
Cool, thanks.
Any other questions?
I'm actually just interested in that point. You say that you develop code for a customer, and then that does go back into the product. Do you have to get upfront agreement on the licensing to make sure that that's actually possible?
Make sure that like when they want something and you know that's something you want to actually keep as a proprietary product, then you need to make sure you're aligned with them so that you keep the IP and you can sell it to others later.
Yeah, because that's one thing that I was doing early days with the services that we were delivering, is that I did make sure I didn't actually go into a contract with a company unless they agreed to allow us to open source the code that we developed.
That's the other thing.
And so actually that was a good way of us actually almost benefiting. You know, it was mutually beneficial, because actually there were a lot of companies at that time that wanted to kind of invest in open source, but they also wanted the benefit of it themselves. And so I made sure effectively that code could be open source and we could benefit from it. And then it got to the point where I think I did get asked a lot whether the code that was specific to the customer was something that they gained a perpetual license for. So that's kind of how we ended up kind of splitting it up. But I would say early days, if you're new to sort of building out an open source company, it is worthwhile maybe considering that as an option.
Yeah, and but you need to really be careful about who owns the IP after.
Yes.
What we've done, so that was really early days in terms of take the app, fork it, and customize it. We're trying to stop doing that because it's been complicated in terms of managing the size of the team. You need to do that. So what we do now, well, we have done, but same thing, try to not do much, is get the customer to fund the roadmap. So some of our big customers in Europe, so mainland Europe, so Germany and France specifically, only can do time and material contracts. They don't want to pay for subscription when it's open source, and these sort of things. So you're like, okay, then you pay a recurring fee for development, and you are going to fund Element X, which is the new version, or you're going to fund the implementation of this new protocol, and everything will be open source. But at least like they help support the overall cost, and it helps the project grow.
Okay, that's interesting. So you effectively got them to pay for the features that you wanted to add and then resell.
It's a nightmare in terms of negotiation, because they want to know upfront what is in your roadmap, and we're going to do this and this and that order, and it's like the team is like, oh my god, it's a nightmare to agree on that, but it's better than nothing, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Tim, do you want to share your experience?
Sure. So I've probably got several questions, actually. In fact, I've got lots of questions. So we've been going for about 8-9 years now. So we're established in the marketplace, but still quite niche, trying to build the brand and the reputation. We're at a point where we are sort of making ends meet, and we're scaling up incrementally but quite slowly, and we're starting to think about VC investment. Is that a good option, or private equity? Is that a good option? And or do we carry on the path we're on, using self-invested funds to grow the company that way? And it's quite a hard sort of stance to take. I don't know enough really to say whether one way is better than the other. Have you got any words of wisdom, any advice? And also, we do hardware, whereas a lot of companies we talk to at this kind of conference and forum are software-based solutions. We do products made from open hardware, software and data, and sell the whole solution. So yeah, just interested in your comments and thoughts around where we go next.
Just Tim, just for the benefit of everybody in the room, Tim's company, as he said, they develop some sensors in the form of hardware, and then they sell services on top of that collects the data.
Yeah, we do a number of different products, but they're all related to test and measurement. So on one side, we're doing production test solutions and hardware in the loop, automation. And on the other side, we're doing kind of IoT monitoring solutions and energy monitoring solutions.
Okay, so advice and guidance. So scaling up.
Quite a hard question.
What do we do after 8 years?
No, I would say that there's no right and wrong answer. It's kind of how do we want to build the company, and there are multiple ways. For us, it enabled us to go and start to hire additional people. And the founding team, 4 of us, were coming from very similar backgrounds. So every hire that we did, say, to help us in the marketing, we did not only get better at marketing, but we learned all the things that we didn't even realize that we need to do. And same for going into sales, and a lot of roles that it would have been a lot slower path for us. So that's something that the funding can open doors. But obviously then in return you have to give up some of your equity, and then you have partners for going the years that you need to work together with the investors as well.
Do you think they're put off by the kind of open source approach? Do you think that scares off investors?
I don't think so. I think if you can make the business model, I don't see there's a bigger difference between open source and proprietary. I think in the end it comes that if you can show the value to customers, what it is in for your potential customers, and then you can show on how to make that scale. Yeah. Then the delivery is only one part of it. And
so it's a kind of value proposition really, and what you're offering, the unique place you've got in the marketplace, and how you make money from it effectively. And whether that's open or not, it doesn't really matter.
Honestly, more and more VCs actually have an open source arm, and they're like specialists in investing in open source software, and it's getting more and more of an interesting area they're trying to get into. So I haven't seen open source, like sometimes if you speak to the wrong people, they're a bit like dubious, they don't really understand. But it's like now more and more have specialism in open source. In terms of the choice between the two, I agree with Heike in terms of both are valid. I think if you can find a way to grow a successful company without giving any part of it to anyone else, well, hell yeah, go for it. But it's always going to be a compromise, because basically what external funding allows you to, when you haven't just walked out with 12 people and you really need something, but if you have a basis and you need to make a choice, external funding will definitely give you the opportunity to accelerate a bit sooner. So another thing for us, when we like the B, for example, we took it because the was pandemic. And what do you need when you're during a pandemic? Communication solutions. So it was a way for us to go faster and grab the market, because otherwise it would just like fly over, and we would have been eradicated by Zoom and Teams, etc. So if you have an opportunity and you need to get on the market faster now, you cannot wait, then you probably will need funding. And yes, when you get external funding, you give a bit of your company to someone else, but God forbid VCs can be useful sometimes, especially if you're a first-time founder it's really useful to have people who have been already supporting hundreds of companies from seed to exit or something, and they have useful inputs and useful network for both growing your team, but customers and these sort of things. So there is no right or wrong answer. It depends on the situation, and both ways are valid.
And I kind of agree with you, actually. Leverage that funding and be selective about which VCs you take the money from, because actually in some cases it can be incredibly useful. I was involved in a company, and it's public information, helping a small startup, and they were the company had an investment from General Motors, and managed to get some press release relating to that. And my goodness me, that does create interest. So think about who you might be taking the money from. Do your homework a bit in terms of be strategic about it, particularly if you're in your case that you know that there is no huge time pressure. But I also agree with Amandine sort of about you don't want to miss the boat for somebody else to come who have the money and accelerate their development and be the market leader.
Yeah, and kind of maybe for at least it was for us that we were very satisfied with the product, and we were kind of very satisfied with the kind of the value that we could drive on our mission. But it's just the kind of outreach, how to get the other people to know about it, and that's a momentum play. There you need marketing, there you need success stories you can share, and kind of people telling stories that they've been successful on the platform, and that's a kind of that's a leverage, or that's an area where external funding can do just many more actions in the same compressed time frame.
Yeah, but I definitely agree with Sami, especially if you're not under time pressure. You have to choose the right partners, because otherwise it really can create problems for you. So do your homework, get references, look at what companies they've invested into, and if you like the companies, then it means like they should be pretty aligned with you, and this sort of things. It's really critical.
I don't have a huge amount to add, but I've been in your situation too. I know exactly how it feels, and I remember looking around thinking, oh, all these people are taking money, they're able to do this, they're able to do that. Like, I felt really, terrible about it, because I wasn't able to the whole team here and do that and do this. I think I totally agree with like being protective over equity and sort of like really thinking carefully about it. Also, like, what's your personal goal? I think when I was starting a company, almost like a lifestyle business was a dirty word, but I think actually that's a great outcome and goal. I mean, you're already successful, you've got a great team, you're doing great stuff. Do you really need to take the money? And then the other thing I would say from hearing from friends who have taken investment, obviously choose the right one, but also, I don't think taking the money is going to solve like the business model issues. Like, maybe get yourself to a point where you're almost confident that you have a model that works and you've tested it out and it's kind of scalable, and it just needs the money to help you to scale it, because then at that point you're kind of ready. Otherwise, if you're taking money and you're still not really set on knowing what your market is and what you need the money to help you sort of accelerate that, then you're kind of going to be wasting time, and you've got the pressures of having the external investment as well. So I'd say test the market, make sure that you've got that sort of pattern down, and then the money's there to just accelerate that.
Yeah, they probably won't give you money if you don't have your market yet, unless you have a tech which is like really unique and has something special. If you don't have at least showing a bit of traction, it's probably no.
So and I think with open source there was a comment made earlier. Sort of, I think a lot of the VCs these days actually are more savvy and appreciate that there is money in open source. That is no longer the case. If you looked at 10, 15 years ago, I don't think it was clearly understood. But I think most VCs these days have people who were themselves either developers who progressed and understand the changes in technology and understand the licensing business models. I would say also I'm going to advertise for Amanda. She recently published the book where she talks about business models around open source. So I would highly recommend that you look at that. It gives you ideas. It gives you ideas as to what might work for you. as a company. Any other questions from the floor? Anybody has anything that they would like to share? Yeah.
I suppose just to add to that, considering I've sat through all of these now and been thinking about this myself, when it comes to funding, we've heard that people have quickly got rid of sales directors or their finance people, and they might have applied for funding for, throw money at a problem or something you don't want to do, or, you've got your big vision, but you haven't done the graft necessarily to work out how you're going to do it, and you're thinking money will solve the problem or something like that. But if you are trying to do it as cheaply as possible, it forces you to really think about, strip down everything and work out exactly what the bits are you need to get to your vision. And then when the money, when the limiting factor is resources rather than kind of the steps or the roadmap, that might be when the money needs to be asked for.
Yep.
Yeah, that's basically the point I was kind of trying to make, that you've also eloquently articulated.
Maybe if I can comment on that, I think that's a very important thing, and kind of the money doesn't indeed solve everything. Kind of we learned the hard way that we were thinking that, okay, we're going to hire a very senior sales person to lead a sales team, and that will solve a lot of problems that we're facing with getting the traction. But it's really hard to find that role in that seniority for a company that would be a match for a kind of or startup at that stage. First of all, the most seniors, they come out from companies and they have marketing budgets or tens of millions of annually, and the startup just cannot afford spending that. And then they're used to that they have teams of 20 people working for them, and it just doesn't add to the calculation for the early funding rounds. So you need to find people that are kind of eager to jump in and perhaps do the work, do the hard work, kind of grow in that role, and find those people. And then that helps a little bit on the money side, but it's kind of the whole hiring process. I think that's important part, but something that you cannot just solve by money. You have to kind of grow gradually and make sure that you have the culture where those people feel well and can execute and can unleash their potential.
Yeah, in terms of hiring when you scale, especially looking at the commercial organization, usually you hire for the specific stage you're in. So if you have no revenue, you hire someone who is has the experience of taking you from 0 to 1 mil AR or something like this, and then the next stage. And usually people are kind of specialists in this, so you know that some of them may have done the full journey, but usually it's like they are currently at 10 million in their company and they want to start again and take another company from 1 to 10. So yeah, that's basically, at least they have the right momentum, the right hands-on, the right experience, network, and it matches where you are at.
I've been in those companies where there's been an injection of funding, and then some executive has gone and said, right, we need to now hire senior people from, at the time it was IBM, Microsoft, Oracle.
They're lost.
They came into the organization, and yes, they were experienced, and yes, they were probably very good at what they did, but they had an enterprise mindset, and they were effectively applying an enterprise mindset to a startup problem. And not only that, they were also coming in above people who'd been there from the beginning of the startup and actually helped build out the early success and grow those first customers. And it created actually a lot of friction, and people were upset, and it actually led to sort of us slowing down in our ability to serve our customers, because especially someone who's less experienced who's joined a startup because they love the idea of the startup and they've got all this experience of running it. You're told by some person that's come in above you who's really senior and has got the perfect corporate or enterprise CV. It's easy to kind of look at them and just think that what they're saying is the right thing to do, but actually that's not always the case. So I would be very careful about that when you're thinking about hiring off taking funding, for definite. And I don't know about you two, but I always like to think about trying to promote from within first before trying to hire from external. In fact, I don't think we've ever, our company anyway, in JetStack has ever actually hired externally into a more senior position at this point.
I think it's great if you can do it, but not everyone is able to step up to the next level. And sometimes when you don't have the experience, like you were saying earlier, you really need someone experienced who comes on the side. And we've seen that, and sometimes like we had to bring, like for example, we had a VP sales, and we were hoping to get him to step up to CRO, but we had to hire a CRO who was bringing a bit more experience. So I think if you can do from within, that's great, but you may have to bring some external expertise as well.
Yeah, because there might be an inflection point where you have no choice. There is, for example, expansion into different territories or different areas. You really need those expertise. I mean, the most obvious one is that you might have to hire somebody in a geographical location because you know that there is an opportunity there. So these are important. But I guess it goes back to the point about having that proof of concept product. You're either selling something that is available and solves a problem today, or you have a really wacky idea that is not proven yet, but it solves an immediate need. So look and consider what you're trying to sell and at what stage is that right balance to sort of say, okay, this is a new idea that I'm sure it will sell, and some VCs will see that as a big opportunity, so they'll be willing to invest sort of at that stage.
Absolutely, and I think the story for that the investors are looking is very different in different stages of the company. So from very early on, if you don't have maybe a little bit of revenue, but nothing kind of traction or that kind of traction that is perhaps regarding later rounds, then investors spend a lot of time assessing, is the team solid? Can they execute on the plan? Is there a kind of a possibility? Is the vision solid? Then on later rounds, it starts to be much more about numbers on revenues and costs and growth and kind of how to make those revenues to multiple and perhaps costs at bay. So maybe on the early rounds, it's really important then to be able to showcase on what's your history and if you can get introduction through founders or other people to investors, all of that helps to build kind of the trust on your idea.
Any other questions from anybody on the floor? Okay. So going back, I mean, I've seen it from the other side. While I was at Arm, we've acquired companies that were doing open source, that were not profitable, but they solved a specific functionality that we needed to complement our services or our products that we were looking at the time. So again, as you're thinking about the funding, make sure that you promote both this idea that you are able to be successful building your business and you're going to grow, but also at the same time continue to ensure that the features that you're developing are unique, because that might help you. You may not need that funding because you're going to get acquired by an entity. And I wondered whether you had, you got acquired, Matt, or your company got acquired. So was that at what point were you profitable already, or?
Yeah, we were profitable. Yeah, what I found though was fueling a product idea or strategy off the back of service revenue and trying to run a bootstrap service business as well as trying to create a product in that company was almost impossible. I found it so difficult. And I also vastly underestimated how much engineering time it goes into creating product and how much service revenue we would have actually had to have created to be able to properly do a product, because it's very tricky, especially in comparison maybe to making revenue from services. And I had a dilemma because, like I said before, I was like, I know that I was in this position where Kubernetes was expanding rapidly, And I was worried if we just did services that we'd get out-competed by the big guys, the Accentures, the Capgeminis, the bigger service companies that were going to start doing Kubernetes consulting. So I might get, my margins and my day rates might start to go down because we were one of very few that were actually doing it. And then if I didn't focus, that I might miss the opportunity to create a product strategy around like a project that we created that might get out-competed or built into the Kubernetes project itself, or some other company may come along and do it. So I was like, oh gosh, I'm going to have to do something here. And so funding is the way to do that. So I spoke to VCs and I spoke to investors locally who are more experienced in service investment. And when I spoke to the VCs, they said, yeah, we'd like to fund you on your product journey, but we don't need services. Like, that's not very exciting revenue for us, and it's only worth 1 or 2 times what you're making. And I was like, oh, well, that's a shame, because I really like my team who are doing services, and I really enjoy working out what's going on in the customer, so I really want to keep that. But the VCs were like, no, I think we need to, maybe put that aside. And then the service investors were saying, well, it's all about buy and build. Forget that open source project that you've created. That's not interesting. Yeah, you might have a lot of downloads of it, but it's not really going to get us anywhere. So let's forget that, and let's just focus on services and just kind of put everything into that. And I found that really difficult to take, because I'd just gone through blood, sweat and tears to get to a point where we had a team of 20 to 30 people. We were doing decent revenue on good profit margins, and yet one side of the VCs were saying, time to sort of like set the clock back to 0 and forget that, and like that was like almost like, for me, take a whole new set of risks and almost like starting again. And then the service one didn't really apply to my ultimate vision of being able to go into the innovation and the product side. So actually the middle ground was finding a company that was doing what we were doing with the Cert Manager project, but we were doing it for global 500 customers and banks, and they've been doing it for 10 to 15 years, and they built a product around it. And what was happening is that those companies were now starting to look, their customers were now starting to look to the cloud. They were looking to sort of deploy Kubernetes. And what was in Kubernetes? Cert Manager, our project. And they needed a way to connect their product to Cert Manager. And so it was like the perfect outcome for me and us, because I could kind of like, I could take some money off the table, because I'd effectively, not paid myself much over those years. I could be confident in the fact that it was a product strategy that made sense strategically between the two of us, and they were willing to fund that. Plus, they had the experience of building a product successfully. They're actually a $1 billion plus company themselves, and I also bought the time to kind of develop the services to help fuel the innovation, and maybe creating the additional open source projects that will support the work that we're doing in Cert Manager. So it was, for me, it was like the perfect set of outcomes, and that's the reason that we decided effectively to be acquired, and it's worked out great. And that was quite a relief for me, because I'd seen a lot of people be acquired and it not work out so well. But so far, so good. And we got the product to market, and I'm still running the services and like looking at where the next movement in the open source is that we can innovate around. So it's really exciting still.
Do you want to add anything else to that, or?
Yeah, we haven't touched on M&A yet. It's also tricky for us, because the idea of Matrix is to take it to such a big level that if anyone wanted to acquire Element, then we would need to make sure it wouldn't capsize the open source ecosystem neither. So it's, so far it's still quite distant. Okay. We want to make sure like we don't feel like we're at the point where an exit makes sense.
Maybe I'll take a little bit different angle. So we started as a team of 4 technical founders. So we had the product pretty much set, and then we had some initial revenue, and we could show that it was coming from global and not from our closest friends. But still, when we were looking for funding, we had a kind of good opportunity to visit Slush in Finland, an event where they mix investors and founders, and you can schedule tens of meetings in one single day. So it's very effective. And we started the pitch there, and we went through perhaps 30 investors, and none of them were willing to invest into us. maybe half they didn't realize what was our product about. Maybe it was our poor explanation, or then it was just kind of not in their specialty.
For technical people, founders, obviously.
Yes, but then and then perhaps the rest 15 said that this doesn't make any business sense. That this business is as AWS and Google and Azure will take all of it, and don't even try. But so you needed a lot of perseverance and trust in your own vision. Then we found one investor, Lifeline Ventures in Finland, has partners that have worked in Google, and they immediately realized that, okay, what you're doing is exactly kind of makes perfect sense. That it's an operational expertise that you are doing on behalf of the developers and in a manner that the automations can scale. It makes a business sense. So kind of just want to say that there's going to be, if you go on pitch and seek funding, there's going to be a lot of rejections. But have a conviction in your own story and the mission and the vision you want to create, and surely there'll be one partner, one investor that understands what you're doing and wants to join the journey.
But if you have rejections, ask why. Then you understand if it's your pitch because they haven't got it, or if it's because it's not their thing, or they don't believe in the project, or something like this. Because if it's your pitch, then at least you can fix it.
Yeah.
How do you decide on how much to actually get or try to get? And obviously you've got a preset valuation already, I guess, but does that come into the way that you think about how much you get, or is it based on the business plan? I mean,
yeah. Basically, you look at your business plan. What is my target? How much do I want to grow? How many people do I want to hire? What is the budget I need?
Right.
And
Same. I think it's the early rounds are very kind of arbitrary. So we had a business plan and we kind of projected on our spend over the next 12 months, and then realized that the investors, they have a set percentage that they want on any given round, and that's pretty much how it ends up in a sum. So, but I think it's on that note, I think it's good to be not trying to be greedy at any point, finding a common ground, both from investor side and the founder side, because in the end, if the business is successful, then through multipliers, that those negotiations kind of they don't matter in the end. So.
And sometimes you also have the advice of if you can raise more, because it's always better to have more cash than run out of money and have to start again.
Yeah. But it's I want to pick up on the networking bit. I know it's not specifically relating to the funding models or the scaling up, but it's a lot easier now as compared to in the past. A lot of VCs actually create open days where you can just go and do the pitch. That's a lot easier as compared to 20 years ago or 15 years ago. So again, that is important. Look in your local areas. Look in I know, for example, in Cambridge, we do have open days where you bring in, talk to other founders in your regions. There are lots of sort of events where you can mix with other people and get ideas how to take your idea forward and decide what is the right business model for you and for your idea. So, sorry, go ahead.
Can I quickly add on that?
Yeah.
I would actually even recommend, even if you're not considering funding right now, try it out. I think it's a very good exercise on formulating your business plan and getting early feedback on how people react to it.
I completely agree. I did that actually, even knowing I was going to start a service business. I did go and speak to all of the local investors, and just what I found out was they knew nothing about open source and they didn't know what I was talking about, genuinely. And then I was like, well, if I'm going to get investment, I'm likely going to have to go to the US. But this was 2014. And I guess since then, thankfully, everything's changed. And I mean, you're both examples of companies that have started UK and Finland that have got investment, and you're getting the traction, the buy-in. So it's not all about the US nowadays, whereas in the past, I think it probably was.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. I mean, again, I mentioned the networking because actually you will learn. I think it was you said ask why you were not successful. That is really, you learn from that and record that because and act on that, because while you might disagree what their opinion is or what their view is, you're learning something from it. You're learning that you have to adjust and adapt your pitch towards other investors. Anybody with any thoughts from the floor? Okay, the back there.
Hi guys. Thank you so much for your time and generosity. I guess for us, we're a company that supports open source maintainers, and we have been talking with Heikki around our value proposition. For us, or the question that I'd like to ask is, the way that we work is we connect companies with their open source maintainers. The way that we're positioning it is, it's how do we connect companies to open source maintainers that in a way that they traditionally wouldn't. And it's about educating companies that the benefit of contributing and connecting with your maintainers is different to today, the way that they go about giving money to foundations, right? Because there's not a direct connection with the maintainer. How, from your experience in the open source space, how would you position that so the big enterprises, I think the small, medium businesses understand the value of that connection with the maintainer, but the bigger enterprises that are comfortable connecting with the Linux Foundation or any other foundation, how would you propose that this is presented to them or pitched to them? Tricky question.
Who's brave enough to take that? It's a very tricky question.
It is.
Anybody brave enough to start?
I'll give a stab. We had a pleasure discussing this earlier. I think in general, if I got that right, what would be the sales pitch to businesses on jumping onto service? I think open source, the business is starting to realize that open source is absolutely critical to every business. Every business runs on open source nowadays, regardless if it's kind of comes through of all the software and everything that they utilize. Kind of there's always open source underneath, and businesses are starting to realize that how critical it is and looking at ways on how they could help to make it viable as well. So I think you already have definitely a market of companies that get this and could well look at this. What might be one additional way on how to contribute back to the open source and make sure that the developers keep on pushing the limits on open source. I see a lot of companies are now starting open source program offices that are either they are looking to hire people working on those upstream communities, or if they have own open source projects, making sure that there are kind of active communities around that. I think those units would be really good starting point on going on and pitching the idea.
I think I'm failing to grasp the question, Natalie. Is the question that you want to connect the big companies who are using the open source software with the original maintainers of the open source software?
Sure. So I guess just to clarify, when we talk to open source maintainers, the most common thing is that they're burnt out, right? So that's just a given of working in open source. When we ask them, have you contacted a particular foundation? And they're like, well, we're not big enough to receive funding from those foundations. But the enterprises that utilize those packages are raising issues with those open source maintainers, right? Because the package is popular enough to be utilized by the enterprises. Now, the challenge that we have is when we go to the enterprises and say, listen, your company, I won't name any names, but your company is utilizing this package, they depend on this person. Would you be willing to work with them, knowing that your team, your engineering team, is raising issues for these packages? Yep. The response that we're getting is, oh, we provide to the foundation. So obviously the system is broken, right? And the biggest burden on the system is the bigger enterprises, not so much the small or the medium businesses. So there is a disparity, or there is a gap between the value creation for the maintainers and the companies that are extracting the value.
Yeah, it's a very common theme in the open source in terms of these big companies understanding the fact they have a kind of responsibility to contribute back somehow, be it money or code. In terms of how to solve it, on the plus side, it's at the top of the concerns more and more. I was at the Open Source Policy Summit in Brussels on Friday. It was like, okay, how do we do that? How do we make sure this happens? Is there a way to make it clear? I think beyond evangelism, if you are, as a company, you're trying to get in touch with the big ones and build a business around that can be helpful. I don't really have an answer, and we suffer from the problem as well. So when you see your tech being used at scale by a country without them funding anything, either by giving to the foundation or by hiring elements to indirectly maintain the software, we are starting to be big enough to knock at the door a day. Guys, you realize what you're doing. If you want to continue using this, you'll have to help somehow.
So I think I would like to sort of give you an answer from my own personal experience. I sort of dealt with the license compliance for ARM and taken ARM sort of to conform with the open chain. And I think it was really a very difficult journey because people that you were pitching for did not quite understand the importance of what is the benefit. So I would say I would actually talk to the OSPOs to explain the dangers of not doing that, the dangers of a maintainer just sort of saying, okay, I'm not going to fix that issue. And I think it is changing. We've had a number of security-related issues that had to be fixed straight away, security vulnerabilities that were identified, and the open source community really stepped in big time. That's a huge benefit if they invest in the foundation or to support that maintainer. That sort of is a way that I would approach that.
I've been listening to this and I've been thinking about it as you've been discussing it. But one of the kind of to pick up on that point, one of the pictures I might paint, and I hope I've got the name of the project right here, but OpenSSL was being used by every company in every part of their business for security. And it was run by 2 maintainers, and they'd been running it for 8 years, and they were responsible for millions upon millions upon millions of deployments that was mission critical to all enterprises. They were in the same situation as the people you're speaking to, trying to get funding from enterprises to get some support for it, and they didn't get it. And then what happened? About 9 years ago, there was a critical vulnerability found in it, and it led to Heartbleed, which became one of the most famous vulnerabilities across all enterprises. And that led to those 2 maintainers getting something like $5 million from Google, Microsoft, Oracle. So that's what woke them up. But unfortunately, it was a response to a critical issue. And I think what you've just said, Sammy, is that actually the software that's being run right now in these enterprises that has the potential to have that impact if it goes wrong. And it's the same. It's Heartbleed now, but with all these packages that are all in there. So maybe you could paint a picture around that. I mean, I don't mean to go and start scaring all your potential customers, but you do have to kind of like raise these issues. And then I would also say that I would focus on the early days on the companies that are highly regulated, because what you'll often find is that those companies cannot, thanks to their regulation, be running software that is not properly supported. Yeah. More often than not, it's banks. And so if you can get a foot in the door with those companies, you can then build some value with those. So just by focusing on those, at some point you may start to get a few wins with some of those projects. You might be building a bit of value, and then at least you're starting to get a bit of traction, and then you can start to build out your company from there. I guess that's the way I'm thinking about it. But
no, that's very good. I mean, like the thing is, people are very receptive and accepting that the problem exists, even with the SSL issue that you mentioned. Yesterday, we went for a walk with a maintainer, and he's taken on a package that 3 other maintainers had burnt out on, right? And it's critical infrastructure. There's one person that's taken a project that was maintained by 3 other people. So I don't think that the funding that Google or Microsoft did to that one particular project has solved the issue. But yeah, I agree. There's definitely a lot that we can do as an industry.
I guess one thing going into that direction, I'm not saying it's necessarily a good option or it's the Cybersecurity Act, I guess, can help.
Yeah.
So the idea is that if you are commercializing your software based on open source, you are liable for the security of the open source. So you need to make sure that there is no vulnerability. And if you're doing it and you're not a commercial company, then it's fine. Like these guys wouldn't be liable for it because they're not selling it, but the people selling the software using OpenSSL would be liable to make sure that this has no vulnerability.
And we will see more and more of that sort of impact. I mean, I don't know whether you know the Open Chain project. It focuses on security and the standards companies need to adhere to when it comes to security. That, I think there's going to be a natural shift for companies wanting, and we've seen the same thing with regards to license compliance. A lot of companies, big and small, sort of decided that they will conform with Open Chain because it became an ISO standard, and that had a sort of a regulatory. I'm sort of conscious that we've diverged from funding conversation, so I want to bring it back to funding and scaling. And before I give the panelists the opportunity to sort of say final words, anybody else with a question relating to funding that they would like to ask? Okay, so I'll hand back and say just last thoughts and advice to people. Matt?
I mean, well, having never been through funding, I'd say don't feel the pressure to take funding just for the sake of it. You know, you can go a long way and do a hell of a lot, and actually can probably end up in maybe even a stronger negotiating position if you go for longer without funding. So I would just an advert for bootstrapping and self-funding, basically.
Save a lot of money while you can. Okay, Ondine, any thoughts?
No, I think that's probably the bottom line for me as well. Like, don't feel forced to get funding, but it can also be useful. It really depends on your journey, where you are, where you're trying to be, the overall situation. On the plus side, open source is more and more known and valued, so it's probably a good time if you're looking to fund an open source company. The basics is basically you need to show traction. So you have to start building somehow and show you're building something valuable. Otherwise, you won't be able to get funding.
Okay.
Yep, kind of want to repeat, there's no right and wrong. For us, it has been a very good choice because through the funding, we've been able to grow faster on the market and capture and kind of from the eyes of our potential customers, from bigger enterprises, it gives us more relevance. There's a less risk of kind of smaller player not being there in a couple of years. So for us, that has been successful, and we've been very fortunate that we have investors that we absolutely love to work with, and they have been able to kind of act as a good sounding board and kind of giving us perspective on
I guess something we haven't mentioned clearly is that funding may not just come from VCs. You can get funding from strategics and like companies who are aligned or have done something similar to you. For example, Automatic, who is behind WordPress, is an investor in Element, and it's just a very similar business model, and these guys can also bring a lot in terms of advice and and help you.
Well, I was quite surprised to hear that. If anyone was at the session earlier with Guy Pajani from Sneak, he's actually invested in multiple people that have been on the panels the past couple of days, which kind of surprised me. And he never actually met them in person. So there's people, even in these rooms, that have the potential to help. He's investing in you as well, I think. So.
Actually, that brings me quite nicely. I was going to say one of the biggest advantages with the open source community is that most of my panelists are very approachable, and I would say, and you know, it's no joke. Ask people who have been through that journey. What is their experience? Learn from that. And, you know, don't abuse it. These are very, very busy people. They have their own jobs. They need to work. But actually, having those side conversations, having learn from that, it's a big difference as compared to the full proprietary commercial world where people don't disclose anything, don't talk about anything. I think the open source, there are success stories that you can look at. Okay.
Absolutely. I'll just add that it's almost a duty for any founder to help all other potential founders and startups going forward. I think that's a kind of...
I am glad I said the right thing.
And I'll be inviting to a few more panels then going forward.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, sorry.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Wondering how crowdfunding works in this world, in the open source. And so Kickstarter projects maybe for a product, open source product. Why is there not enough of that?
Yeah, you could start with crowdfunding and these sort of things at the beginning. That could be an option.
Is there any risk to that?
I guess you end up having many different people being involved in your projects, and that might be a bit tough to manage.
Yeah, I've only seen one example of crowdfunding in open source, and that was when Canonical created an Ubuntu phone, and they put it on Kickstarter, I think, and it was like the most funded project. It didn't actually reach their goal, but I think with I don't know, the companies that in the open source space tend to be quite deep tech, and they're quite hard to sort of like have the flashy sort of like marketing sort of pitches around. So I would say, and there's enough money in the space where I'm guessing your average founder like can find an investor that can, you know, connect them to good people, invest enough money in them, and do what they need to do without them having to take the crowdfunding route. That's my guess. But maybe there is something in it. I mean, you know, maybe you could be the next person that does it, and you know.
The Librem 5 as well was funding like this, and so basically you end up having your community backing you, and we did get donation. So we have on one hand the funding for Element as proper VC and strategic funding, but we do get donation on the foundation side, which is another way to get it.
Yeah, there is no right or wrong, but I think you need to consider at what point you might want to give that control because other people will have opinions. And this applies, by the way, even if you go to a VC or individual funders, they will want to have a say in the direction. I mean, I know Matt mentioned, well, they said to me that to stop the service side of it, and he didn't like that, and quite rightly so. So these are the things that you need to consider quite carefully. Do your homework. What are the implications of going down this route? Is the key thing. I think I would say. Okay. I think thank you very much to our wonderful panelists. Yeah. So thank you for attending.
I'm going to give a specific shout out to Matt, who's been in every single session over the past 2 days. Thank you for that, Matt. Oh, and Heikki as well, you have as well. Oh, and I think you, Peter, you have as well. So thank you so much for everyone who's been here inscribing as well, and also to the people who are doing the media at the back. I really appreciate your time, and Beth for being brilliant with a microphone.
Good. Thank you.